And we'll post a link to the recording on the webinar on our webinar webpage when it's available. It usually takes me a day or two to get it up there. In order to ensure high quality recording, all attendees are encouraged to mute your microphone. I believe you may be in listen only mode already. If you have questions for the panel, please enter them in the Q&A or in the chat, and I'll do my best to moderate the questions. And now let's get started. First, I want to go around the room and just have Regina, Jock, and Tammy quickly introduce themselves. And Regina's on mute. One of those lovely, lovely.
Right. So I had to take myself off of mute. So take two. My name is Regina Romeo. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer for CPS HR Consulting and also our DEI program leader.
Good morning and greetings, everyone. My name is Jacques Whitfield, and I am the DEI Learning and Education Team Lead, and it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. And Tammy, you're muted also, it appears.
You're also good. See, it's not just me.
Okay, I was going to say I didn't mute myself. Am I off mute now?
You are off mute.
So I'm going to do take two. So I'm Dr. Tammy Hodo. It is actually afternoon here. So I'm just happy to be on the panel. Just a little bit. My doctorate is in urban studies, minor in sociology, and I focus on race, class, gender, and ethnicity. So always happy to have these difficult conversations.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we have a few questions to kind of get us started here. And the first kind of point that I wanted to bring up to y'all and have a discussion started is talk to me a little bit about how organizations can craft inclusive initiatives that go beyond recruitment and training. I mean, a lot of these DEI initiatives that are happening right now, a lot of times they're focused on how do we recruit a more diverse workforce, or here's 2 or 3 trainings on implicit bias kind of a thing, and then you're good to go. Here, move on with your life, right? And obviously from our perspectives in the consulting world, it can be a lot broader than that.
Right.
How do you craft those initiatives that are broad-based within organizations?
I think you have to start from the inside out, because it's one thing to say, okay, well, we have X amount of people that break down into these categories, but it's really about also doing the inner work, because once that person, you can recruit very easily. You can diversify your recruitment with no problem. But once that person gets there, what is the environment like? What is the culture like? Is your culture even attractive to a diverse bunch of candidates? If you've been in the news for something that's maybe unsavory, or you have a reputation for not being as inclusive, or looking at your org structure, your diversity is only represented in the lower part of your entry level of the organization versus the administrative and the executive part of the organization, it tells a different story. So being mindful that you have to, if you build it, they will come kind of a thing. If you make your organization that much more attractive, you're automatically going to attract diverse candidates. So there's usually a hyper focus on men, women, non-binary, and then, fill in the blank for whatever diversity. And then that's it. It's just strictly demographics without really thinking about it in terms of culture.
I think another... Oh, go ahead, Tammy.
Okay. I was going to say, I want to second what Regina said. So I come from an academic background as a faculty member, and I would always be the only one in the department. And as she said, it's easy to recruit, but it's difficult to retain. Because if I feel like I'm tokenized and I'm isolated, I'm not going to stay. And being the only person who looks like me at the table often proves to be problematic. I think that companies need to have mentorship programs. They need to develop pipeline programs with, historical Black colleges, university, Hispanic serving institutes, tribal colleges. And then you need to incentivize, like tuition reimbursement or some type of program that's going to allow them to work their way up to a leadership role. So I think all those things are important as well.
Absolutely. And I also come from an academic background, and I just wanted to share. I think it's important to have a global perspective. Regina and Tammy, you both made some excellent points. And I think it's really important, rather than looking just solely internally, I think it's really important to get a total global environmental scan of the organization, including all of the distinct and different constituencies that the organization touches. Are there clients? Are there customers? Do we serve students? And really feel like, what is that experience that I'm attempting to create? And then through that lens, begin to address, how do we make this organization more welcoming, more inclusive, and more reflective of the global society? Again, I think that global perspective and that global vision is key in order to get some real traction and some real success.
So
Yeah,
that
and
being
if I could just, oh, I'm sorry. If I can just
go
if I
for
can
it.
just add to what Jacques was saying, and that's so relevant, right? Because we see what we call brain drain, where we're recruiting a lot from Asia, because we often don't have people to fill certain positions, and they have the skill set, but is your company, do you have that climate of inclusivity to keep them? You know, so I'm prior military, like, do you have sponsorship where you have, and when I say that, if someone's coming from another country, like I'm sending packets of information about, you know, where, you know, potential places they could live in this city, and just thinking along those lines to help them get as acclimated to the country, right, as possible. And then kind of what Regina said too, like women, the buying power of women and the amount of women who are educated, we know, right, is increasing and outpacing men, and we're in the workforce. So you have to create those policies and procedures and structures to not only recruit us, but again, retain us.
And so to that point of recruitment, we had a question come in. How does the company or organization best cultivate that diverse talent pipeline? Like, what would you recommend as far as building that pipeline and making sure that it's diverse and qualified for your organization?
I would say your best recruiters are actually your current employees. And what often happens is it's, you know, people are pulling their hair out, like, how do we do this and how do we do this? And they're not looking at their employees to try to understand how to appeal to different communities. So in public service, we provide services across the board. So those little pockets of communities you may not reach with your recruitment efforts, but when you put that information out internally and say, hey, what organizations are you a part of? What civic groups are you a part of? What are you actually doing in your community? Your organization should be reflective of your local job market. So who's available to even come here? You know, I worked for, 16 years for Los Angeles County, and literally every mile and a half, it's a different community. So when we talk about things like voter services, do we have enough people who answer our phones that speak all the languages that are spoken in Los Angeles? Are we printing our materials in different languages? Are we attracting other people? So it's really not just thinking of that job description that we put out, you know, and post and pray that somebody will answer it, but really using all of our resources, and your current employees being the biggest one.
I think another thing that's really important too. So first of all, I love this question because myself, Regina, Tammy, we talk about this all the time, and we get a lot of feedback from clients who are seeking, you know, these solutions. I think it really is important, again, to take that step back and have support, whether it's external support, partnership support, in terms of having an honest assessment of your organization, or an accurate, transparent assessment of your organization. Is your organization a destination point or a destination preferred employer for those diverse candidates? And again, you can't see the picture when you're in the frame, so it really helps to have partnerships. And I know, Regina, you know, we have a philosophy at CPS HR where we meet the clients where they are, and we essentially serve as a reflective mirror to the clients and really show them, this is where you are, now where would you like to be in terms of aspirational, and we can give you those tools so that you then become that destination employer. But I know, and again, all of us have shared this a lot, you know, if you go out and hire those diverse candidates, without giving the means by which they can be successful, they are going to leave. And that is going to communicate very broadly among, among prospective applicants, prospective candidates, that you're not a destination point. So I think it really requires organizations to be thoughtful and responsive, as opposed to being reactive, and really doing the work required that's going to create that that element, that environment where all, a rising tide lifts all ships, they say. So where all candidates, especially those diverse candidates, are going to be successful, are going to thrive, are going to stay, and then they get to be your recruitment stars who can go out and attract other amazing talent.
Yeah, I agree with, excuse me, everything that has been said. I really like the ideal of the ambassadors from within the company already helping. And if you've recruited and you're able to retain and they feel that sense of power, allowing them to go and help you with your recruitment. And I've done that before when I've served as a diversity officer at a law school. I would go to, the historical Black colleges and universities and work on recruitment and creating some type of pipeline. I also think that it's important, though, that you assess the demographics. And Regina kind of alluded to that already, of your organization. If you have diversity, but they're all in like the frontline positions and not in the C-suite, you really need to do some reflection. Because like coming from an academic background, I would see people like myself on campus who work there, but they would tend to be the food service workers, the lawn care people, the janitorial staff, and the executive assistants, and which these are all noble jobs, nothing wrong with them. But again, when I would be at the table, it would be just me, and so that you really need to maybe look at doing a climate survey, because are the diverse people that you have, are they actually happy there? Do they feel like they're included? And then look at those demographics of your workforce, what's the representation, and then creating that pipeline and working with the ambassadors. So I think all those are great ideals.
Tamara, you said something, can I say, you said something really powerful in terms of looking at the existing employees that you have, and you spoke about fitting in versus belonging. And I think, and Regina and I have done a lot of work with our respective agency and our clients that we serve in terms of really creating that sense of inclusion, and inclusion to the sense of belonging as opposed to fitting in. And there are several or so many diverse candidates who fit in, but do they really belong to the organization? Do they feel a part of the organization? And again, that's another opportunity, another invitation for the organization to do those environmental scans, to do those assessments, to really gauge what type of work environment are we creating, or in the academic space, what type of educational and learning environments are we creating, and how do we get to be better? So I think that's absolutely critically important, that organizations get to invest the requisite amount of time, resources, energy, in really making that. And then one other point I wanted to say, it's really important about being in the transformation space as opposed to transactional. And oftentimes, for those of us who've been doing this a long time, like, well, all of us on the panel, we remember the days of, hey, did my 2-hour training, my 4-hour training, I get my certificate, I'm good to go, one and done. And the world has changed and changed again, what we have seen. And I think the change is certainly for the better, but we really get to be more in the transformational space, that this gets to be multi-generational work, and the days of one and done training, they're just gone. And the organizations who really embrace this transformational mindset and transformational practice, I believe, are going to be the more high performing and more effective organizations.
Do y'all feel that ERG groups can play a large part in that recruiting initiative and building that pipeline, as well as contribute to, like what you said, Jacques, that feeling of fitting in more so than, or belonging more so than just kind of looking the part and
just being
feeling
there,
the part, but actually being the part? Do you think those are important?
I think.
Well, can
ERG,
I?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, can I share just a story, right? So last week I was presenting about that. So let me tell you what Mattel did, right? They used their ERG group, their employee resource group of African Americans, and went to them and spoke with them about creating a new baby doll. And they asked them about complexions. They asked them about names. They got all their input. And guess what their number one seller is now?
What's
The
that?
baby doll.
That African-American baby doll.
Wow.
So if you
Yes.
don't think your ERG is important, I mean, they were, to me, that was smart on their part to go. And they did. And they asked them and they were so happy to assist. And to me, that creates that buy-in. Like, you asked me my opinion. I'm not going anywhere, because not only did you ask, but you used it, and look at the outcome. So I know that you'll come back when you have other questions.
And it just creates that feeling of being valued by your organization. You know, you really feel connected to what's going on, because there's a lot that happens in the workplace where the voices are cut off. You know, so when it comes to the ERGs, they can be a gold mine. I mean, we've all seen examples in whether it's in advertising or different companies where they put something out and it's like, I know you didn't ask anybody about that before you did that. So when it comes to doing outreach, when it comes to providing any type of product, any type of service, any type of anything that we do in the public space, it's about bringing people in. It's about listening to diverse voices, and not just, okay, well, here's what we want to do, and so we're just going to run with it without enough, you know, intel. Is really what your ERG is. I mean, like I said, they're a gold mine of information. So open up that line of communication, ask those questions, get some information that you would never have under any other circumstances, because that's why they're there. And that goes a long way to build trust with the organization. You know, we've seen time and again where, again, people are cut out or cut off or not being heard. And it's just, it just becomes just a tragedy, you know. So you have a lot of people leaving the organization for a lot of different reasons because they never got to feel that sense of belonging.
So yes, yes, and yes. I agree with what my colleagues say. And Jason, I think this is an important and management has a responsibility not only for connecting with ERGs, but also communicating with ERGs. That management's responsibility, and I'm looking at, I'm virtually connected to me and Regina, you know, from the Chief Human Resources Officer space, that our responsibility for diversity is all inclusive. And we recognize that ERGs are looking through their respective lens, and that is effective. And from the CHRO perspective, I get to look at the sum total of diversity. So you're coming from your affinity group, and I get to share with you through transparent, courageous communication. Yes, that is important. And so are these other factors. So how are we recruiting with our veterans? How are we recruiting with women? How are we recruiting with millennials? How are we, you know, engaging, you know, all of the respective, you know, rainbow focuses? But then how do we additionally look at, you know, other factors that make up the sum total of diversity? Because we're not just looking at not one particular group, we're looking at everything. And so how do we move the needle for all of them? And I think it's a wonderful engagement tool and a wonderful opportunity for everyone to grow, because then I think organizationally what you want to get is for your affinity groups to understand, yes, diversity is top of mind. And it's not just from my affinity group that we recognize that the true meaning of diversity is our strength. And so affinity groups can get into a position where they're actually supporting other affinity groups because they realize this is top of mind for the organization. We want to create this welcoming and inclusive organization that is reflective of the global community, and the global community looks very, very diverse. So I think with those, you know, with those perspectives, I think that they are very, very powerful.
So we had
And I like the partnership. Sorry. Look,
No
Jason,
worries.
I'm sorry. I love the partnership thing.
Don't
So
give me any airspace to jump in.
So coming from, you know, academia, right? We'll see like the Black Student Union, Hispanic Student Union, things like that. And they get together and they collaborate and they do things
Absolutely.
like this.
Absolutely.
This month is Women's History Month, you know, and so you'll have, you know, women ERGs or, you know, whatever, you know, at the universities that will get with other groups to help celebrate and make it much more inclusive. And just to go to kind of what Regina said, like your brand will be hurt if you do not have that diversity. So we've seen like the coolest monkey in the jungle shirt. A lot of backlash from that one, right?
Yeah.
Yes, right. We've seen another
Yeah.
company that had a noose on some things. We've seen some other ones that have, and it's just like, I'll never forget. Probably won't
Right.
spend my money there because obviously I know no one looked like me was at the table, because if they were, you would have
Right.
never put that product out.
Absolutely.
So we had a question come in from Mark about, and this is a little bit of a pivot about vendors and a lot of, the organizations that and public sector deal with a lot of procurement processes with vendors and all that. And how do you have a vendor be respectful of DEI? Or is that something that happens in like the contract process of awarding a vendor? You know, and making sure that they're considering DEI, like enforcement and policies and procedures and all of that.
There's a couple different things. We get a lot of RFPs, a lot of requests for proposals for our services, and a lot of the organizations that are putting those out into the open space, they'll put that on the RFP that we're looking for small businesses. We're looking for, I won't use too many acronyms, but basically we're looking for the smaller businesses that are run, minority business owners, veteran business owners. And so that's already a part of the conversation. When you as an organization are putting that out there, that's what you need to include in at the beginning of the process, because it's difficult to get a vendor and then 30 days down the road or 60 days down the road, you're like, oh, well, what does your company or what does your organization do about being inclusive and being diverse and so on and so forth? And they're like, I don't know. So it's really incumbent upon the organization or upon the potential client to say, here's what we're looking for, and open it up, because you're gonna invite a wealth of diversity that way. You're still going to have your other businesses, obviously, your big ticket businesses that will say, but also the small business owners that are sometimes forgotten or left behind or left out of the bidding process will also be invited to participate. And they bring that perspective to your organization.
I also think that the way you
ahead.
do anything, yeah, thanks. The way you do anything is the way you do everything, right? So we cannot say that we are a welcoming and inclusive organization and we want to attract these diverse candidates, but at the same time, we're not doing business in the procurement space with diverse companies. So again, and that energy, that knowledge, it's going to be known. So I can, on the one hand, I really want to attract these diverse candidates, but I'm not doing business with any diverse companies. It goes back to, there's a huge disconnect there. I know the work that the three of us, the four of us do is really all about, creating one singular conversation, a single message that's saying, yes, we are welcoming and inclusive in every single aspect of our organizational development, organizational design, organizational operations. And so again, I just think it goes to, fidelity to the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we also have diversity in procurement, that we also have diversity in our external communications and working with our customers, and people who are external facing look like the communities that they serve.
Yeah, and I have to agree with that. I'm of the mindset, though, when I respond to RFPs, often I see they'll ask, so if you subcontract, what are the demographics of those that you're subcontracting with? So cities, states, and companies, they want to know now, because they recognize that some vendors do lack that diversity. But I also think it's imperative, before you award a contract, that you have those conversations. So are you doing ongoing training? Are you talking about microaggressions? Are you talking implicit bias? Or is it a one and done? Because we know this is a continual journey. We're all growing and learning. And this isn't, like we've said, that one and done. Those days are over. I recently had a conversation where I found out they did 40 hours of training for mental health initially, and then after that 1 hour each year. And it's like, okay, that's not really enough training at all, considering the level of mental health illness that we know is in our society, as well as specifically now during the pandemic. So I think, you have to ask those questions up front with the vendors that you potentially would bring in, because if you're bringing in vendors that aren't reflective of the demographics of that area or your employees, that could send a bad message.
Absolutely.
Tammy, you mentioned, that we're all growing and learning. And one of the, important things in workforces now is having these types of inclusive conversations and getting things out there in the open and, approaching them in a way that is in a safe space. How do you all recommend having those types of conversations in the workforce and foster inclusivity in the conversations more so than like divisiveness or conflict?
I think empathy is very important. I think too often when we begin to have conversations surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion, people have this ideal of sympathy or guilt. That's never what it's about. It's about empathy, trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So I believe in emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-regulation, and having, vulnerability-based trust in the workforce, where I could say, hey, Jason, when we were talking the other day, you made this statement, and, and this is just you and I talking, and I recall the conversation, and it was a microaggression to me, and I don't know if you know what that means, but this is what, and then you can say, oh my gosh, Tammy, that was not at all my intent. But we have to create that climate and culture within the workplace where we can do those things. Because if we can't do that, then we're leaving a lot of people out. And this is a conversation that should be had by all. This is not just minorities or those who are underrepresented, because we have diversity of thought. And geographic location matters, to your ideologies, religion, all those things. So I think you have to create that transformative climate, though, where you have that vulnerability-based trust and a lot of empathy, where people want to understand and have that emotional intelligence.
And I think it's important also to just kind of expand your definition of diversity. Like Tammy was saying, it's not just, your ethnic group or how you identify with your gender. It's diversity of thought. It's generational diversity. I'm just thinking of my HR team. I have someone who is an immigrant. I'm personally first generation. I have people who grew up in the South. I have people who are California natives, and they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s. And so it's really about understanding that nobody's coming in as the big dog, basically. And when you enter into these conversations, you have to think, okay, let me go into this conversation giving as much respect, compassion, and empathy as I expect to receive. Because I think sometimes when we start to have these conversations, everybody comes in with their guns blazing, and it's like, well, I'm going to shove my ideology down somebody else's throat. And it's really getting to the point, and Jacques will talk about acknowledgement versus agreement, I'm sure, where you can acknowledge that you have a difference of opinion, that you have a different lived experience, that you have a different background. And we don't necessarily have to agree on every single thing. On the big things, absolutely. There's, when it comes to respect and those other things. But my reality does not somehow negate your reality and your lived experience, and vice versa. There's room for all of us to tell our story, and that's what helps create that safe space.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's really, as Regina and Tammy so eloquently put it, which is why I love working with them. Best job ever. But it really is acknowledging, what does your come from? What are we attempting to create here? Is it a transactional check the box relationship, or am I moving into the space of transformation? And transformation is not easy work. It is multi-generational work. We say often that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And through the lens of cultural intelligence, which is our philosophical foundation upon which we do this work, we acknowledge, as Regina was saying, the nuanced distinctions between agreement and acknowledgement. Agreement is really a binary juxtaposition where you're looking at one worldview versus another worldview. You only need to look at American politics to see what is the world of agreement: red, blue, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. There's no in between. And so it really is just this tug of war between worldviews. Acknowledgement, on the other hand, is a way in which we can hold multiple and competing truths, and a situation in which we ask ourselves philosophically, what else is also true? And we're constantly expanding the space that we can hold these multiple and competing truths and comfortably, uncomfortably hold them and allow ourselves just to sit with it, because it's transformational work. But that is the space where we acknowledge every lived experience of every human being, and every story of every human being matters, gets to be brought into the space, gets to be honored. And that work is where we see, or from that space rather, is where we see the true transformation. And again, for the organizations that move there and that move there successfully, they're going to see some beautiful process. And part of that process, folks, is conflict. Conflict is a healthy part of the growth process. I'll tell you this, quoting my shero, Brene Brown: you cannot have courage without having vulnerability, and you will fail. And failure is a part of the growth process. But just learning how to recognize those factors and learning how to manage those, we manage those expectations so that we're in this for the long haul and not moving along and then, oh my God, there's a conflict. Oh, well, let's pat this up. This wasn't working. Exactly. And so again, one of the things that all three of us preach, Jason, and this, is really about having that courage to continue to have these conversations. And it may get rough before it gets better, but it's all about normalizing the conversations. I think one of the reasons that these conversations are so difficult is because we don't have them regularly. And whenever we talk about a diversity or DEI issue, we lean in and we whisper, and we either go to, Regina or Tammy or I get called into the space, and I need to talk to you. And it's like, let's just normalize it. This is a situation. These are the tool sets that we get to use to address and resolve this. And let's keep doing the work. But I think, all this together is really going to help us move the needle and create those more welcoming and inclusive spaces.
So we had a comment come in, and
I'm sorry, I got a little something to say, Jason. Okay, so I think that we have to
waving first. I had a feeling you're going to cut me off, but go ahead. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Right?
I love it.
It's a question from our people out here that need to know things.
Okay, we're going to answer. But I think what Jacques was saying is so real, though, is that cognitive dissonance is alive and well in America. If we look at the way the history has been written, there's an African proverb that says, as long as the hunter writes the story, the lion will always be the victim, or something along that lines. And I think that we need to recognize everything we've been told and taught doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate. That we need to, have this open mindfulness and be willing to do some additional research, because too often when we introduce new concepts or ideals to people, they're very standoffish. And it's just like, no, like, this is real. Like Cornel West said recently, he said he thinks, Americans are just beginning to realize African Americans are human beings too. And it's kind of like, I see that when I look at the history books, right? Our history didn't begin with slavery, but that's often where it starts. Or if we think about the women's movement, it didn't include all women in the 20s and the 60s. Now we're in a much more inclusive one that recognizes our women of color, our trans women, and things of that. So we have to be willing to accept that new knowledge as just that and do some additional work. Okay, Jason.
Thanks. Thank you. So a comment came in, and I'm gonna sort of shift it a little. But there are lots of districts and areas throughout the country that maybe don't have a lot of diversity in them, right? And as we look to kind of build a more inclusive environment for those areas that don't have a lot of diversity, what's the best way to approach that, especially when you have concerns about, not overtaxing or offending the people that are currently there, right? Because to some of those people, they feel like, oh, this isn't an issue. This is just a waste of time kind of thing, right? And how do you manage that, mitigate that to build that inclusive environment within that culture?
I think it comes down to what I said before, which is redefining diversity, because every community in the country is diverse. I think what happens is people think, okay, well, there's not a lot of Black people here or Asian people here or, Latino, or Hispanic or Native American or whatever, so we don't have diversity. You have diversity, whether even if there's 4 people in a room, there's diversity there. So it's really about expanding what that definition is and then being inclusive of that, regardless of what somebody might look like externally and the color of their skin or whatever. Are you being inclusive of different age groups, of people with disabilities, of veterans, of people of different sexual orientations? It's so, it's so pervasive in terms of diversity, but I think, like what Tammy was saying, in terms of redefining how we think of it, because we spent the last however many years thinking diversity just means Black, Hispanic, Asian, and white people, and that's it. And that's where the conversation ends. So when we look at our demographics, it's like, okay, well, even in our region, it's, homogenous, let's say, 75%, of one race or another. There's still diversity within that. So it's really still incumbent upon us to apply a lot of the same principles that we would use for a race or gender diversity conversation to talk about these other conversations so that people are not excluded or forgotten. So when it comes to things like, tracking and reporting, and we get a lot caught up in a lot of the analytics sometimes, and it's like, oh man, we only have, X amount of people that fit into this category, X amount of people that fit into that category. Then expand your categories. Would be my best advice, would be how many people are really coming to you and saying, I don't feel comfortable because I'm getting bullied or excluded because of my sexual orientation. That's everywhere. I'm being put out or not included in conversations because of my age. That's everywhere. So really understanding an expanded definition of diversity doesn't mean that, quotas don't work. Fill in the blank doesn't work. So be mindful of what is really going on in your organization, in your community at large, and start to do that work that way to service the folks that are working for you, and that helps them serve their communities. So don't think that there's a perfect structure of, well, now we got to go, recruit somebody from 500 miles away to come in and fill in this blank for us, because you don't want to do that, and that person coming in doesn't want to be that person. That's a disservice all around. So be very, very, very mindful of how you're defining diversity, I would say, and you'll find that there are conversations that can be had, whatever your makeup is right now.
Amen. What she said. It's so funny because I was chomping at the bit, and of course, Regina nailed it out of the park. But that's absolutely correct. And in fact, in the training, in the learning and education that all 3 of us do, we spend an awful lot of time talking about language and really educating our constituents on having a common language so we can have a common understanding, so that we can move effectively through these spaces, because so many of us hold on to definitions of diversity that are 20, 30 years old, and effective best DEI practices in the 21st century are in another space. And so absolutely, that diversity is all inclusive. Even if you look at, just like take one category like abilities. How many candidates who are people living with disabilities are not invited in for interviews, whether it's a sight impairment, hearing impairment, physical impairment, what have you, but are our workspaces really, we know about the ADA, we know what is legally required. Having said that, practically speaking, are our workspaces welcoming to people living with disabilities? And that's good feedback in terms of in terms of moving that needle, that again, I get to do what Regina was saying in terms of my definition of diversity is changing. So now I'm looking at everything. And even if from an ethnic perspective, I have a homogenous population or overwhelmingly homogenous population, you still have these other factors that are alive and well. And the only reason that, you know, again, my dear colleague, Dr. Hodo here, that cognitive dissonance is real, you know, I don't see it because I don't want to see it. And so, you know, we lead our folks in our very interesting conversation about what am I pretending not to know? Or what am I pretending not to see? Or what am I pretending not to experience? And that is, you know, transformative in and of itself. But again, it gives great feedback to what are the growth opportunities and how we can make our workspaces and our educational spaces far more inclusive and welcoming.
Yeah, and I mean, and I definitely, you know, echo everything that has been said, and just realizing that we have 5 generations right now in the workforce. That gives you diversity, right? We have to think about geographically. So I'm from Wisconsin. I drink from the bubbler. Most people don't know what that is. It's a water fountain, you know, but just that whole diversity of thought based on geography, right? I mean, I lived in Europe for 6 years. You know, so I spreche Sie Deutsch, bisschen. You know, I mean, and to go to kind of what they said, I'm a service-connected disabled veteran. You don't know that when you see me. You all disabilities you can't see. You know, so we have to be aware of that too. But there is so much diversity in the workforce. But really, are you tapping into what you have? You know, and I think to me that's been like the theme. You know, you have these people, but do you know that you have them, and are you utilizing them to their full potential? Because if you do, the profits that you bring are going to increase, the level of productivity is going to increase, and your retention is going to increase.
Right. And that's going to make you not have to go out and recruit, you know, every other day, because I think what has happened historically when someone brings those concerns up and says, well, you know, I'm having problems working because of my disability, or I'm being talked to a certain way because of my age or whatever. Oh, well, we don't want to hear that, you know, so they, you know, basically exile that person, you know, put them in a store, in a little room somewhere so they can go alphabetize the M&Ms until they retire, you know. And so what we really need to do is say, well, tell me a little bit more about what you're experiencing, and think about diversity in that way versus, well, I'm looking at Tammy and she doesn't look disabled, so we may not, so it must not be a problem. It's like, no, there's a lot that goes on underneath the surface. So it's really about having those conversations, even if outwardly it appears that you don't have diversity.
So we had a question come in just for people that are unfamiliar with microaggressions. Can you guys give a few examples of what a microaggression might look like?
Regina, can I use you?
I would have done one in my question, but then I didn't know if the joke would come across, so
you are rather articulate.
Right. Telling a Black person that they're well spoken or that they sound white, that's not good. Or assuming that an Asian person is good at math, or, you know, some of those other things that are just, you know, making inappropriate comments based on either a stereotype or a thought. You know, it's like, oh, well, can I touch your hair? Or no, you cannot. No, you cannot, you know, or anything else that is something that you wouldn't just say in a respectful conversation, you know. So even my friends that are blonde, you know, one of the things that she had said was, you know, we were in a training thing, and she said, you know, I started wearing glasses and people were coming up to me telling me that I look smarter. You know, well, you look smarter when you wear glasses. It's like, I was smart before the glasses, but thank you. You know, so those little backhanded comments or whatever, like, you know, you're well spoken for a Black person. It's like, what were you expecting? It's always my retort, you know, where it's like, I don't sound white. I'm Black. I've been Black my whole life. Both my parents are Black, and this is what I sound like. So it comes off as more insulting than anything else, because it speaks to perpetuating a stereotype about someone's race, gender, class, whatever have you. and that's not what that person wants to hear. You can say, I enjoyed your webinar today, and I'll be like, all right, Tammy, thank you, and we're done, but to say that you sound white or that you're, it's especially because my first side story, my first job was working in the call center, and then I was working in human resources when I moved out of the call center. And I remember talking to a lot of our employees on the phone, and when they would come down and meet me in person, they would look right past me and say, I'm here to see Regina. And I'm like, she's right here, so really getting past what your expectation is about that person, or the assumptions that you make about someone before you even know them. Because I'm fine for you to tell me that I'm well-spoken or that I'm eloquent, but it needs to be more than that, and not be tied to anything that is based on my race or what your perception of my race was supposed to be. But good question.
Yeah,
no, great question.
And if I could
question.
just add, it's just those subtle everyday slights that people in marginalized communities get, right? They describe it like 1,000 cuts a day, And so if we even think about body type, right? I've seen this where I've seen women be told, well, you have such a pretty face. And it's like, oh, like, that's not a compliment.
It comes with the rest of me.
Yeah, exactly.
Great personality.
Right, but I'm just saying, it's those everyday slights that people in marginalized community, or someone saying, well, you don't look gay. I don't know what gay looks like. Gay to me is happy. So, I'm not real sure what you mean by that. But, Harvard students a couple years ago did a thing about microaggressions, and it was like, I too am Harvard. And they were like saying, and it was an Asian student that said, no, I'm not good in math. His sign, or another student that said what Regina said, like, no, you cannot touch my hair, or what I'll get because of my appearances. So what are you? I'm human. What about you?
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, so,
right,
we
right.
Yeah.
I'm running out of patience is what I
Right.
am, so.
And this is a great conversation, and I think it really is illustrative, especially in the educational space or academic space, because at the same time, we are also unequivocally, promulgating that we get to create these safe spaces so that we can have these conversations. And in the work that we all do, we are all in spaces where people want to know what's the proper way to, I want to acknowledge that Regina is a great speaker. I want to acknowledge that, Tammy has, beautiful complexion. I want to acknowledge that Jacques is just an all around, great at everything. But I couldn't resist. But how do we do that in a way that is respectful, that is culturally proficient, and that doesn't marginalize? And so, I'm sorry.
And it's not complicated, because people get caught up in like, well, now I got to be politically correct, and now I got to figure out
Exactly.
how to people or whatever. And it's like, you really don't. Don't say anything crazy that you wouldn't say to anybody else. Would you walk up to a non-Black person and say, can I touch your hair? Probably not. Okay. So it's those types of things where it's like, it's a lot less work than people think it is.
Right. But it's important. It's still, I think there's an interesting dynamic, Jason, because as we move into these spaces that the conversations have never been had, and now we get to create a space where we get to have these safe conversations and educate. And in that educational space, we take on a different superpower, because it's like, I'm not going to slam you here in public. However, I am going to educate you in a subtle and effective way that you get to know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And that conversation in and of itself, and that process, is going to be multi-generational, because again, looking at us on the screen, I grew up in the South, Regina grew up in the South, Tammy grew up in the Midwest, and we're all from, divergent and diverse backgrounds. But I'm in North Carolina now, and I'm going through a little PTSD, but
welcome back to the South, Jock. Welcome back.
Because I was that kid. It's like, oh my God, you speak so well. You're, and all the other stuff, that baggage that goes with it. And you're like, thanks, I think.
I think.
But
I think
yeah.
that's a compliment, right?
but the other side of that from the education space is that it is necessary and incumbent for organizations to create this safe space, to do the proper education, to know
Right.
this is the way that we give positive reinforcement and positive acknowledgement, and conversely, this is the way that we do not do those things.
And
so
it doesn't have to be a fight. It's really just about
Absolutely.
educating each other, because they're, just, I grew up where I grew up. Everybody else grew up where they grew up. And we can have those
Right.
respectful, adult conversations about what it means to work together and be together and commune together, and not have to have I'm right and you're wrong kind of an outcome. It's just like, oh, okay, I learned something today, so
Right.
yeah.
I think what's really interesting is that the my perception of the microaggression question was going to be that it was not going to be that interesting from the response. But I'm actually seeing in the comments a lot of interaction about like dance like a white guy, or different comments
Right,
that
right.
are, and I do, by the way, but those sorts of comments and open communication that make you laugh, that make you think, are very helpful in this case, and it may be a good exercise for different organizations. We have about 9 minutes left and not a lot of time, and one of the questions that we had talked about before was kind of about metrics and how do you measure these things, and what are those best practices to be able to track the progress of organizations becoming more inclusive or achieving these DEI initiatives? And I was wondering if you could weigh in on what that looks like.
I think the first thing that you have to do is to literally do an assessment, not an audit, not a fault finding, not a guilt or shame building type of exercise, but to say, where are we? So we do a lot of assessments with our clients to figure out, like, we meet you where you are. Maybe you've done a lot of DEI work, maybe you haven't. All of that is fine. But to really go, again, beyond just the statistics and beyond the demographic breakdown of your organization, to really figure out how you're servicing your employees and your community. And from there, I think what happens too often is people try to jump to action instead of really doing something strategic, where it's like, okay, we put out a survey, here's the feedback that we got. We do not have enough activity in the disabled veteran community. So let's go find some partners to work with. Let's show up for that community. Let's bring them in and let's have some conversations. And then you track that by doing other, what we call pulse surveys. So you're doing a follow-up in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever, for whatever group of people that you're working with. Do I have enough sign language interpreters? Do I have enough people who are bilingual? Do I have enough people who are providing services? Like right now, for example, a lot of organizations are, well, we're all trying to work our way through the vaccine, but a lot of elderly people can't get online, can't get, the service that they need. So are we being inclusive and saying, okay, well, come to the library, because everybody goes to the library. I love the library. And they do a lot of service. And then that is what helps move that conversation from one place to another. So you can look back and say, okay, well, over the last year, we've partnered with this group, and this group. And here are some of the initiatives. Here are some of the seeds that we've planted, because a tree is not going to sprout overnight. And I think that's where a lot of organizations kind of shoot themselves in the foot. They're expecting that everything is going to be done in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. And when you think about how long it took you to get to the point to even be mindful or to acknowledge what that situation is, that's your starting point. That's your ground zero, wherever you are. And everything else builds from that. So in a year, let me go back and ask myself the same question. And that's where you track the progress. Because again, your demographics, you can capture that from your HRIS system in 2 minutes. That's not the work. The work is really the transformation, where the conversations about your organization, about your city, about your county, about whatever, are changing. And that's what you're hearing back when you're putting out, whether it's a customer service survey or it's an employee pulse survey or whatever, and that type of data gathering. But you have to have some type of structure in place to do the initial assessment, and then find out how you grow from there. That's how you track.
Yeah, so I like what Regina said, and I like SMART, right? So specific, oh gosh, look at it.
Measurable.
Thank you.
Attainable.
Specific, measurable, attainable, right? I like to track it that way. And I think if you create, like, once you do the pulse, like Regina said, and you maybe devise a plan, if you do want to increase diversity, a diversity of whatever that is, if you create a strategic plan where you're actually going in, and putting, like Regina said, so we're at 5% here, but we want to move it maybe to 15. Let's put what type of goals, are realistic for us to be able to reach that. Let's review this quarterly. Let's put this, as someone's responsibility, let's spread the wealth in that regard in order to create that, and then that way you can go back and constantly check, well, where are we at in this process? Maybe it's a 1 to 3 year strategic plan. Maybe it's 3 to 5. It just depends. But, and recognizing the demographic shift even in your area and maybe the customers that you're servicing, and making sure that you have all of that, because you want to have that specific, measurable, attainable, reliable, right, and time bound type of process in place, and create that plan that you can constantly go back and review it.
Jason, the only thing I would add there is it would just underscore what the lovely Regina said at the outset, and that is resist the temptation to move into committed action without doing the homework. For us at CPS HR, it's all about the assessment. And the assessment is agnostic. This is not a report card. It's not a pass-fail exam. It's feedback. And with the feedback it's data gathering, it's information. And with that information, you now have a roadmap to help you ascertain and determine where would you like to go and where would you like to grow into. So absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank everyone very much, and thank the panel, Regina, Jock, and Dr. Hodo. If anybody on the line has additional questions, or you want any of us to reach out to you, please mention that in the comments in the post survey from the webinar, and we'll have that recorded and pass that along to Regina, Jacques, and Dr. Hodo. We're at time. And so again, I wanted to thank you very much for the helpful discussion. Everybody can get a download of this webinar on our website. If you go to CPS HR and go to the About section and then click on webinars, all of our recorded webinars will be there. There's also a number of free webinars that we offer. We have our HR series webinars once a month on usually the second or third Wednesday of the month. And every Friday, there's short series webinars that are 30 minutes on a variety of different topics from our trainers. So please feel free to take a look at those, browse the webinars that have been done in the past, and register for anything that you are interested in. Also, Regina, Jacques, and I are often talking about DEI on our podcast, Work Life Unbalanced. Feel free to give us a listen on Spotify or iTunes or wherever it is that you grab your podcast, and maybe we'll bring a Dr. Hodo in the mix in the very near future. So,
well, I want to know, and I'm sorry, Jason, but I need to know what happened to my German Shepherd in the background. Did we bore him? Because he was there for a moment and then he left.
He left.
Bear has a mind of his own.
His name is Bear?
His
Yes,
name's
he
Bear.
got his own agenda.
Oh, okay, because he's handsome. Okay, just sorry.
He does his own thing.
It's all about you, Bear. All about you.
Yeah, I got a Frenchie sleeping next to me here. Thankfully, she hasn't been snoring too much. But again, thank you again, everybody, and the panel. We appreciate your time, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.